money. For centuries, we've been told that it makes the world go round. But for millions of Black and brown families, entrepreneurs, and business owners, it has brought their world to a screeching halt. In today's terms, we are smack dab in the center of a worldwide medical crisis, global racial injustice protests, and the most promising country in the world becoming more divided than ever. And if there's one thing that 2020 has taught us, is that this ever-widening racial divide determines who thrives and who doesn't survive. Meanwhile, many companies are attempting to make more significant strides than ever before in bridging inequality gaps. One of the companies quite literally putting their money where their mouth is on the issue is PayPal. Creating real systemic change is a continuous journey that requires us to always keep taking steps forward, no matter how big or how small. This is the work in progress. In June of 2020, PayPal announced a $530 million commitment to support Black businesses, strengthen minority communities, and fight economic inequality. Also, after surveying its own employees, they discovered that 60% of those working at call centers or in hourly roles were struggling to make ends meet. PayPal responded by increasing wages and ensuring that employees could cover their essential living expenses and put together an employee financial health program. I spoke with CEO of PayPal, Dan Schulman, and Executive Vice President of Global Sales, Peggy Alford, to find out about the inventive efforts they are doing both internally and externally to resolve socioeconomic inequality. Dan Schulman, CEO of PayPal, welcome to the Work in Progress.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's do a little brief history. You joined in 2014, and here we are 7 years later. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, how has your mission changed over the course of 7 years?
So our mission that we defined, and we spent a ton of time thinking about this, Chris, as you could probably imagine, was basically how do we help democratize financial services, which basically is a fancy way of saying, how do we allow everyone to manage and move their money, inexpensively, quickly, so that managing and moving money isn't like a right for the affluent, but it's a right for everybody. And if that was our mission, then we had a set of values around that. And our primary value is how do we become a company that is more inclusive, that supports diversity, because our mission is diverse by its very nature.
There's been a lot of we stand in solidarity emails, and people are changing their logos on LinkedIn and everywhere else. But then it's just like, oh, we actually need to do work.
The time that I realized that this was going to be an ongoing fight was when we withdrew from North Carolina because of the bathroom bill. And our reading of it allowed for the potential discrimination against somebody for their sexual orientation or their sexual identity. And I said to myself, no, this does not work for me. We are pulling out of North Carolina. But when we did that, the amount of emotion that brought forth from letters from customers who loved us because of that, and letters from customers who not just hated us for that, but also sent many death threats to me as well, is when I realized that standing up for your values is not just the thing you say, but it's a thing that if you do, you need to know that you're in the fight for this.
The $530 million fund, kind of walk us through that program and especially just making it real, making the promise a reality.
As it turned out, we upped it to a $535 million commitment. But, when all that outpouring of emotion happened post George Floyd, I spent a lot of time talking to Black employees inside PayPal, Black leaders inside PayPal, Black leaders across the country, from Reverend Barber to Darren Walker to others, to basically say, what does it mean to get involved in this, to take a stand for it? And the thing that I heard back, which really made an impression on me, is, Dan, this can't be a moment, it needs to be a movement. Because, the moment will pass us by. And the same issues will be with us a year from now, 2 years. Like, look at the last civil rights movement. The racial wealth gap is exactly the same as it was back then. No improvement. And so they said, how do you become part of a movement over time? Which means that you need to be part of the fight, as we talked about, not just give $2 or $5 million to some very well deserving nonprofits and then go, okay, we did our thing there. We showed we cared, and then move on. And that's really where we said, like, we need to show that we're part of the fight over the long term. And we need to step up and make a commitment that matters, and a commitment in a place that we maybe can do a little something about, which is the racial wealth gap, because we're a financial services company. We did like $15 million of what we called empowerment grants to Black-owned businesses that could not get loans to stay in business through COVID. And so these were grants. These weren't loans. These were just like, here's money to get through this moment. And the reaction from those communities and those grantees was emotional and heartwarming to see the difference we were making. But also we invested in community banks, in lower income neighborhoods to like help the community. We invested in venture companies that invest in people of color, in Black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs to help that gap that exists as well.
On the learning side, you've obviously come across a lot of statistics that PayPal is combating, one being sort of the 70 million underserved financially cultures around the country. Talk to us a little bit about that and how you've been able to combat that, especially, a level of responsibility that PayPal has as a leader in one of the most important industries in the world.
It's the first generation that has ever thought they will not grow up to be better off than their parents were. This whole idea of the American dream, if I work hard enough, I'll get ahead. And I think one of the jobs that we have at PayPal, one of many jobs that we have, is trying to create a degree of financial health for those that we serve. Because I think financial health is a bedrock or a foundation of so many things. And so we put into place a very comprehensive program here at PayPal that looked at how well are our employees doing financially. And so we slashed the cost of healthcare benefits by 60%. We gave everyone in the company equity. We raised wages where we needed to. We put all of that into a financial education program so people understood what it meant to save, what it meant to have equity. That mattered to 50% of our employees. That changed their lives. And we need to do the same things to the customer populations we serve. How do we help them become a little bit more financially healthy?
Peggy Alford, Executive Vice President of Global Sales, believes that profit and purpose go hand in hand. Therefore, diversity and inclusion will always be a part of PayPal's ethos. What have you seen change or stay the same as it comes to diversity and inclusion inside the organization?
Well, since Dan Schulman joined, I have to say that diversity and inclusion has always been a part of PayPal and how we think about things. And one of the things that I really like about Dan's leadership is that he views diversity as, the representation you need in order to serve your customers well across the world. What I mean by that is the way you actually build product and deploy product that's going to resonate across the globe is to ensure that the people that are doing that within the company are representative of the customers that you're serving today, as well as those that you want to serve in the future. And so the way PayPal thinks about diversity and inclusion is it's just good business. And it's the way you get it right with your customers. And so that's always been something that's been a part of what we do. In the last year, the racially charged murders that happened in 2020 have really lit a fire under companies in terms of really identifying and sort of understanding the challenge that we have in our country. Companies are being asked today to consider how they can make a real impact, and it's become table stakes. And I know that for a lot of employees, especially Black employees, it sort of felt like, I don't know why this is such a surprise. I don't know why this isn't something that has been known. This has been our life experience. It's been our experience working at companies, and it can be frustrating when it becomes this sort of awakening moment. That said, the way I feel about it is it makes me happy that it's happening regardless of whether it should have happened in the past.
What sort of tools have you seen, or processes or methodologies internally have you seen to like kind of break that open a little bit and get people on board and like moving as fast as the culture is wanting to move?
I do think that, with the change that we're looking to manifest within PayPal, we're thinking about first understanding and learning and listening, and then thinking about how we actually make sustainable change. And so that involves really trying to understand the perspectives that exist in our communities, within our employees, and using those to influence the type of change we're looking to make.
Can you walk us through some of the efforts when you talk about from team to team and sort of the idea of ownership and who does what and so on and so forth, but really creating more of a shared responsibility when it comes around diversity and inclusion? Something like, for instance, internally, you have the financial health practice. Maybe that could be an entry point to discussing just some of those other initiatives that are happening internally to kind of spread the love, if you will.
We made a $530 million commitment towards Black and minority-owned businesses and sort of closing the wealth divide that happens within Black communities versus white communities. And when we announced this commitment in June, we thought about how best to both balance the need to truly identify the most pressing needs that we just need to put resources against right away, but balanced with making sustainable and long-term change. First, we wanted to make sure that we had the voice of our internal stakeholders, our Black employees, through the Amplify, which is our ERG for Black employees. We listened a lot and thought about, what are the community organizations that they think most about that can help influence where we want to put that commitment. But we also partnered with the Association of Enterprise Opportunity, which is an organization that has a lot of expertise and network to help us determine the right businesses that needed to receive immediate cash grants. But we also wanted to make sure that we were thinking about a longer term commitment. And so, we wanted to think about Black venture and Black startups and Black community banks, and thinking about our suppliers and vendors and how we target investment towards those. And all of those efforts are more long-term. So we're doing tranches of investment.
So Peggy, let's say I'm an employee at PayPal and I recognize a need for a change. What is my first step to take as a new person, or maybe a little lower on the hierarchical system?
For sure. First of all, we are hiring. But, I think that you can speak up, right? And, one of the things that I try to encourage everyone that I work with is that, your voice is important. And so speaking up and, we have lots of forums to enable employees to get their word out and, get their thoughts through. But when we made the $530 million commitment, what we realized is that we were going to need to rely on the expertise of our employees that come from communities across the world and across the country, but also bring their own experience and perspective in a way that can really enable us to get to some of the root cause challenges that we have. And so we've made it very clear that we need to hear from our employees, and we've heard a lot from our employees, and we've gotten a lot of the ideas that formed our strategy around our commitment from the walls of our company.
If a finance company like PayPal can act on issues wider than Silicon Valley, then they have the potential to help end the racial wealth gap on a global scale. It's this internal shift that creates an external growth, and if I tie that to something I read recently about PayPal's goal to grow to 1 billion users, how do you think this sort of focus on financial inclusion internally resonates externally and gets you closer to that goal?
One of the ways that you become or have a chance to become a great company from being a good company is having an employee base that really believes you're making a difference in the world, knows a company stands for a set of values, tries to do the best to be sure that they're financially healthy themselves. And if you can do that, then the way that employees approach populations that we're trying to serve that are excluded from the financial system can be done with a degree of empathy in our products and our services that can make a real difference.
PayPal is really genuine, and I think that is an important part of the puzzle. And they found something in their DNA, which is finance, obviously, but it is a great equalizer, a potential equalizer when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and especially financial security. That's the one thing that unifies us all, is the amount of money we have or do not have, and how we're able to manage that, and what's our emotional relationship to financing. So even the things that they've done internally, like standing up this sort of financial health program with their employees, definitely affects how they operate externally. The most surprising thing to me was just really this is not lip service. You have a lot of organizations that send emails and they do the tweets and they change the logos and they do all these things, but to find that there's a deep-rooted sense of empathy that comes from leadership and extends down into the walls of the organization, and also the inventive nature of how they go about doing it. To stand up a $535 million fund is no easy task, and especially the harder part being actually executing on that promise.